Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan, and today we're coming at you with This Week in Cannabis news from July 24th to the 30th. Now, before we jump in, if you enjoyed this video or you learned something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. And of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos, and then there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with. Think of it as a time capsule. I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place so that you can watch episodes over time to learn about the evolution of the US industry, identify top US MSOs that you keep seeing pop up, and take advantage whenever you feel ready, if you wish to do so, of course pending whatever incremental reform we're supposed to get from now until the end of the year. And so before we jump in, I just want to give everyone a heads up that for the foreseeable future, I'm just going to be doing one episode a week and condensing everything into This Week in Cannabis that I will continue to publish on Sundays. It's going to be a lot of tabs, I know, but I've started a new job and I just don't know if I'll have the time to allocate on Wednesdays just to make sure I get everything done, at least until maybe September, October, once I learn the ropes of the new gig. Then I can start possibly putting them out again, but just want to give you guys a heads up. So I appreciate anyone who watches and supports the midweek update, but going forward, it's just going to be the one episode on Sundays now. And so with that, the news as we jump in, not necessarily surprising, but cannabis, of course, does always find a way to get the backseat to other priorities. The can has been kicked down the road again, and we did not get anything before the August recess. And so this reporter for NBC News, Julie Sirkin, has given us the latest update, as apparently Schumer is reading off a laundry list of priorities for when the Senate returns in September. It's not the first time we've heard that. Do you even believe her at this point? Nah, not really, but other than funding the government and confirming key nominees, Schumer says that they want to take on the safe banking bill related to legal cannabis businesses and the Rail Safety Act. And so take from that what you will. Well, the second source I did find this week giving us any sort of update to confirm what Julie was saying was Sahil Kapoor, who is a senior national political reporter for NBC News as well. So kind of coming from the same source, seems like they both probably got the scoop, but he says Senator Schumer lays out the agenda for the Senate when it returns from the August recess, listing a bunch of things and making Safe Banking Act the last on his list. So seems like less of a priority than how Julie organized her post, but just sharing with you what we have as of July 27th. And so for anyone that's very doubtful that we're going to get safe, obviously the rescheduling is a much bigger deal, because if we deschedule completely, from my understanding, you don't need safe at all. And I think if we reschedule the 345, we still don't need safe. But obviously, those in the industry that have been promised the opportunity 2 years ago are the ones that need safe, and that's why we want it. And so for anyone that's very pessimistic at this point, here's a little bit of hopium from Senator Jeff Merkley, based on what he knows as of 4 p.m. or 4:30 p.m.
Senator
July
Merkley,
27th.
first of all, thank you for all the work you've done on safe banking. Do you care to give some update as to where we are now and where we're likely to be in the fall?
To everyone who's advocating for the Safe Banking Act, keep it up. Passing important legislation requires people.
We're making change happen, guys.
Continuing to weigh in. It is outrageous that the cannabis economy is a cash economy subject to all sorts of criminal activity, including assaults on employees, burglaries, money laundering, tax fraud, and so forth. So I am optimistic that we are going to work through the details and when we come back from the August recess, but the committee needs to keep hearing your voices about how important this is, so it becomes an issue that cannot be ignored in the press of other business. Thank you.
Yo, Sherrod Brown, where are you at? And so thank you, John Murphy, at least for providing this video. And while they say for us to continue doing what we're doing, does reaching out and calling make that much of a difference? I don't know. Obviously, it might not, but we like to think that it does, and so appreciate anyone that has thus far. And this is just another example why we need to just continue putting on the pressure and not give up from now until then. And so while this story came out midweek, well, I didn't really know what to think of it at first. Obviously, it's a load of horseshit, but the fact that it's even made it to the New York Times with a title that so blatantly displays the discrimination and the double standard that this cannabis industry faces, you'd almost want it to be a power move from Mastercard to try and force a change at the federal level, because this should be unacceptable, of course, from any functioning government. Should not be allowing this sort of discrimination towards the citizens of its country. And so obviously it's yet another reason why safe banking has urgently been needed for the last 2.5 years. But moving along, wanted to share this because this was surprising, seeing the amendments being removed from all other possible vehicles. But for Nats for TIG updates, is the House voted on the amendments that were added to the MilCon VA spending bill, one of which would protect veterans who use state legal medical cannabis and allow healthcare providers to recommend cannabis to patients without being penalized by the VA. And while I might have appeared pessimistic in my past videos, just sort of highlighting trying to get this passed in the NDAA, where we know it's never going to get passed, just anything cannabis friendly likely won't, I'm very happy to see that these amendments did pass. And while it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to become law, we'd hope it to be so that veterans finally get access to the cannabis that they should have gotten access to years ago. And so while this is behind a paywall, for Politico Pro, a little bit more info here if you wanted to pause to read. Otherwise, link will be in the description. But hey, it's a victory for the vets, at least in the short term, but amendments don't necessarily mean that they become law yet. And so let's hope that pans out in the long run. But with that, from the Dales report, an interesting one that came across my page, important point from Zuanic, an associates partner, on the widely non-discussed issue of cannabis rescheduling or descheduling. Now, this, I'd never even thought of it beforehand, and so obviously since it's come across my page and now it's a thought on my mind, I figured I would share it. But this is according to Pablo, so of course take it with a grain of salt. He's been right a lot in the past. He's also been very wrong. He notes that under existing regulatory framework, only med can be subject to rescheduling, as rec is not a medical product. Like, what? Really? Like, that technical? It's possible, but according to the Dales report, based on what Pablo says, it's something to consider. And so what do you think? You think this is a technicality that can be applied and, can just make what we think would be a simple solution all that much harder? Let me know in the comments. Now, this is the full report from Pablo, and he shares some key highlights here. Rescheduling for Med MJ may not be so great for MSOs, as Rec MJ can be descheduled but not rescheduled. And again, I don't know if that's true. Take that with a grain of salt, but it's what Pablo sees. Better to just lobby for the removal of 280E outright without rescheduling. I don't know about that. But main thing to highlight is this is the picture that it's showing. So you can pause to read. And whether this is true or not, only time will tell. At least a vote on the Safe Banking Act and an announcement from HHS and DOJ in the near term would certainly get the ball rolling, and then, we'll cross this bridge when we come to it if this is true. But with that, highlight of the week, MVP goes to Matt Gaetz. Again, I didn't know I was a fan of this guy, but he's just making more and more sense the more I see him. Wanted to share this breaking DEA Administrator Milgram commits to pushing HHS Gov to get a Schedule 1 cannabis determination. Why they haven't been able to get that thus far and provide an update, beyond me, but wanted to play this whole video because it's something that you don't see very much in government.
So one reason people die from fentanyl is because they get addicted to opioids and get poisoned, right?
Yes.
And one reason that people get addicted to opioids is because they get prescribed opioids and that prescription turns into an addiction, right?
So I would absolutely say the beginning of the opioid epidemic started with...
Why do they go with, I would absolutely say, just answer yes. They're asking you the question. They're not asking you to say what you would say to being asked a question. Like,
unlawful prescribing.
Right. Not everyone. That's a pretty large swath of the problem. And one of the reasons people get prescribed opioids is to deal with chronic pain, right?
Yes.
And throughout the country, there are people who use medical marijuana to treat chronic pain as an alternative to opioids, right?
I know a number of states have passed laws, yes, related to medical marijuana.
So I guess my question
she
is
has no
this.
idea.
Why has the Biden administration not taken marijuana off the list of Schedule 1 drugs?
So, Congressman, as you know, the president had sent a letter to the Secretary of HHS and to the Attorney General to ask for the descheduling process to begin. It's now with HHS. They are in that process. They start, then they send it to DEA. We have not received it yet.
That's
Note that our answer doesn't answer why it hasn't happened yet. It's just, this is what we've done thus far.
encouraging. When do you expect to receive that recommendation from HHS?
I have not heard of a timeline from them, so I don't know.
That's unsettling, isn't it? I mean, when you don't even know a timeline, it doesn't really make it seem like something's front of mind.
We have constant conversations with HHS and with FDA, but we have not been given a specific
front of
timeline.
mind?
Will you leave this briefing and encourage HHS to give you a timeline on getting that information to you?
I will ask.
Thank you. And when you receive the work product from HHS, is there any basis that DEA would have to oppose the descheduling of marijuana as a Schedule 1 drug?
So the way the scheduling process works under the law and the regulations is HHS does a review. They then send it to DEA. We then do what is known as an 8-factor review. There's an opportunity for public comment as well. And so we go through that part of the process. And so obviously we start with what HHS has provided us. We then go through our own review and a public comment process, and then we come to a scheduling decision.
And just share with me, with the country, what your perspective is on what the outcome of that should be.
Well, because I couldn't prejudge it at this point in time, I have not seen...
Do you have a personal view on whether or not marijuana should be a Schedule 1 drug?
As the head of the DEA, I will ultimately be responsible for signing off on what the scheduling is.
Will you consider in the analysis that's being done the studies that pretty extensively show that in states where there is medical marijuana access, there's a lower rate of prescribing these opioids that then can lead to addiction, which then can lead to the deaths that we've seen.
You have my full commitment, Congressman, that I will keep an open mind. I will look at all the research. I expect that we will get additional public comment or research that comes in, and I will look at all of it.
And Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record a study conducted by two PhDs, Marie Hayes and Mark Brown, that looked at the prescribing of opioids in states with medical marijuana programs, and indeed found
testimony
that
now.
States with medical cannabis laws had a 24.8 lower mean annual opioid overdose mortality rate.
Without objection.
You've heard that here first, but
I really hope we get this done. We're 2 years into the Biden administration, and I honestly had hoped that by now we would have already descheduled marijuana from the Schedule 1 list. Maybe talk to me a little bit about the challenges that DEA has in this patchwork system where marijuana is federally illegal, but then hemp is allowed under the Farm Bill, and then you got people operating under the color of law.
And then he gives her the chance to highlight that it's more of a structural problem than the fact that they just don't do shit when it comes to cannabis. And so at least this is going to make her hopefully want to actually help him and find the solutions he's asking for based on giving her this sort of like softball question, but we'll take it.
In all these states, doesn't that seem like the least effective way to go about this?
If I could speak more generally about our diversion program, which is the unit that controls all of the scheduling, all these questions you're raising, this is an important part of our work at DEA right now, is to look at the existing regulations and the existing processes.
But it's hard, right? I want to draw from you the obvious admission that different states having different programs, and then the federal government having sort of an incongruent regulatory system with the hemp law and Schedule 1 being maintained, that is confusing.
And we deal with it, Congressman, all the time.
And it makes it harder, right? The fact that it's patchwork does probably make the job of DEA agents harder.
Even look at xylazine right now, which is something we're having conversations about, is lacing fentanyl. It is certain states have now moved to schedule xylazine. It has not yet been scheduled in the federal government. So these are challenges we face all the time.
And I would just also add, there's a huge research potential to unlock if we get this right, and I certainly hope that we do. And I appreciate your commitment to gild the lily at HHS and get that work product in your hands. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Matt Gaetz, for having the balls to just speak the truth and get this, testimony on record and in Congress, and hopefully help get the ball rolling, because her responses were not great, but I guess they're somewhat reassuring if you wanted someone to tell you that all parties involved are working towards a December 2nd deadline. And whether that's true or not, as always, only time will tell whether Ann Milgram is a woman of her word. But at the same time, while this is speculation, we've heard from Jason Wild and a source of his that it's very likely possible that this rescheduling determination is already completed and sitting in a desk just waiting to be used at the right opportune time as a political tool. So we don't know. All we can do is plan accordingly for our own situation based on what we think might happen. All I can say is that the more I read the sentence, get a Schedule 1 cannabis determination, it reminds us that a determination is not the implementation that we all want and know that we should have gotten for the last 50 years, but it's going to be a report that determines the new recommendation. And so, what's the timeline going to be for the slow-ass government to take the steps to actually implement this, right? Probably a long time, and while that's annoying, I just want to remind you that it was very similar to what I saw in Canada, though, in the sense that at one point, Canada's government announces that they're going to legalize cannabis, and obviously this is going to take a long time, but it was around the announcement that the buzz actually started, and it wasn't until the bill was actually signed into law in October of 2018 that the bubble actually popped. And so could the determination be, the bottom and bringing buzz back to the industry and seeing some institutional capital flow back in, and the eventual implementation being the sell the news event where the bubble pops? I don't know, just thinking out loud, but if anyone happened to watch 2018 or have been around for that long, let me know in the comments if you can see some sort of thing like that playing out, because that's the one benefit to this timeline dragging on, especially as we head into the 2024 election cycle, because I don't make the rules. Just for whatever reason in the past, whenever there's an election cycle, cannabis typically runs, and so do look out for that, but again, take whatever I say with a grain of salt too. But with that, the second highlight from Steve Cohen, rep out of Tennessee. Government got it wrong on cannabis. Yep, they've been wrong for decades. We know that. We need to focus on the real problems like fentanyl and other deadly drugs. Amen. Deschedule cannabis, please. And he seems to think he came across something genius here. Cannabis should be reduced from Schedule 1 to Schedule 420. Okay, Steve, I'm going to give you the floor, but that wasn't as cool of a line as you thought. Either way.
I've seen DEA heads, I've seen FBI directors, I've seen attorney generals sit exactly where you're saying and say governmental gibberish about marijuana.
He's got some pretty cool swag, though.
They've done nothing for 17 years, and for years before that, it goes back
70
to the 30s. And the government has messed this up forever.
Brutal.
And you need to get ahead of the railroad. You're going to get something from HHS. Biden understands it should be reclassified. He said from 1 to 3, that ought to be classified from 1 to 420. And we ought to just clean it up and get over with it. First on marijuana, is there anything you could do to expedite your process by starting some of the laborious, tedious, time-consuming roles put in front of you by doing them now before HHS gives it to you.
Our process is triggered when HHS sends a recommendation to us, and so that will trigger it.
So they're not proactive. They have to wait and be reactive. That's pretty annoying.
What I will say to you is that I am committed on trying to move things as quickly as we can at DEA.
I'm going to help you. I'm going to call the secretary, who was one of my colleagues, and I'm going to call him today. We're going to get this moving.
I hope so. And obviously you can see some of the clip was edited towards the end as well, and so I'm not sure if they put her answer out of context. I mean, it sounded like it fit. Regardless, just pointing out another MVP, Steve Cohen. Thank you for speaking the truth and getting this testimony on record, as obviously we've needed it now more than ever, and it seems like the pressure is certainly mounting, and the DEA knows that this needs to get done. Well, this one from Marijuana Moment essentially summarizes everything that was said in these last two clips with Matt Gaetz and Steve Cohen, and so nothing new here. Link is in the description if you wanted to read it, but DEA head commits to requesting cannabis scheduling review timeline from health agency, and I got that December 2nd deadline from the initial documents written in the review request, and so it'll just be funny if she comes back in September and goes, yes, well, we got a timeline of December 2nd, and so we're working hard towards that. Obviously, something sooner than that would be ideal, but full link in the description if you wanted to go through that. Well, an interesting visual from the Weed CFO, just highlighting how people of all ages and all backgrounds love to use cannabis. Old people love edibles, young people love blunts, everyone loves joints. Yes, they do. We don't discriminate. Most frequent product form by age, 2022 versus 2023. And so the light bubble looks at 2022, and then the dark one, 2023. How this has changed, all the different categories, and then ages 18 to 34 at the bottom, ages 35 to 54 in the middle, and then ages 55 and up on the right side. So some interesting things to take away from here. But with that, some other studies just to highlight from Springer Link, this one as of July 18th, cannabinoids in symptomatic treatment for people with multiple sclerosis, a systemic review of randomized studies. So not a study, but a review of a bunch of studies. And so I invite you to pause to read the whole abstract, but interestingly enough, new studies show very similar findings as cannabinoids exert effects of potential relevance to MS, their action of neuroinflammation suppression, their immunomodulatory and neuroprotective effects in the central nervous system could benefit people with MS. Yet, they claim in the summary, their effect on chronic neurological pain is uncertain. And obviously, if we descheduled, we'd be able to find more, but clearly it says here that there could be neuroprotective effects, something worth looking into, while adding nabiximols is approved and available for people with MS and moderate or severe spasticity in many countries, and that's a nasal spray that contains THC and CBD. I know that's legal in the UK. And cannabinoids are also licensed in several countries for the treatment of chronic neuropathic pain. At least these countries are able to do the research so that they can determine this, why the US can't still deschedule, so we can learn all this. But as always, watch the tone shift in the summaries. Compared with placebo, cannabinoids likely reduce. Wait a minute, it was a systemic review of randomized studies. Did cannabinoids overall reduce, or did they not reduce? Why the hell are you throwing adjectives in the description here? The severity of spasticity and improved well-being in the short term. We went over that one. Serious adverse events are not increased, however. Well, that's another positive takeaway. Withdrawals due to adverse events, and I get this being stopping using cannabis due to an adverse event, are slightly greater in the cannabinoid group than in the placebo group because, of course, the placebo group wasn't taking anything. But then, of course, this is what we get out of every single study. Most of the included trials had major weaknesses. Of course, we can't get the real funding. Studies of high quality and large sample sizes and longer follow-up period are needed. Can't get the funding because stuck in the Schedule 1. Moreover, further research is needed in order to assess the short and long-term adverse effects of these drugs. So sick of this sort of copy and paste in every single study. But with that, from PubMed, another one from June 9th, 2023, naturalistic examination of the anxiolytic effects of medical cannabis and associated gender and age differences in a Canadian cohort. Well, it is another very small sample size, unfortunately, just 184 participants, and so 61% female, 39% male. You can pause to read the rest, but the main thing, cannabis consumption resulted in a significant decrease in anxiety scores among both males and females, average efficacy of 50%, so clearly it's effective, and efficacy was similar across the three cultivars. And obviously may not be for everybody, but at least this study, you can pause to read the conclusions more, but it is based in Canada, so it's just a little bit more forward-looking as towards how we can actually improve these studies to find more of the medical benefits as opposed to trying to frame it and find harms like so many of the past studies out of the US. But with that, found this from ipsjournal.eu, but a great write-up from this author, Julika Luisa Enberg's Why Legalizing Cannabis is a Win for All. No shit, to this day, the EU is blocking the legislation of cannabis. It's not even the EU, it's the UN, despite wide societal acceptance and many arguments in favor of allowing it. So I recommend reading through this just if you're interested. It does touch on a lot of what Europe is going through, but main thing is it's the first article besides a few of the sources I follow on Twitter to actually even mention that European drug law is still based on an outdated UN convention, and this is one I've brought up many times, that is already more than 60 years old. While other laws have been adapted again and again as society has changed, drug law has stood still in time. But given the changes in society, EU-wide legislation should now be considered. Already financially, it would pay off for the EU, but it's just a matter of the European Commission actually allowing that change to happen. So grab the full link in the description if you wanted to go through that. And no doubt it's in every European country's best interest to completely withdraw from this outdated convention and not re-enter it with any restrictions, because fuck that. You don't want to be stuck in this outdated 1961 UN Single Drug Convention put in place by the very racist and costly Harry J. Anslinger. Big fucking mistake that guy made, and we're still seeing the consequences today. But apparently Switzerland could serve as a model, which has already happened. And while we know Switzerland has started some pilot projects, and cannabis has sort of been legal in Netherlands forever, for whatever reason, Malta and Luxembourg have been able to get away with fully legalizing, although I don't believe they've launched any commercial markets. The big one was Germany that wanted to do that, got prevented by the UN because they found out that the UN overrode their national sovereignty, but they're doing everything they can to do a light legalization, you could say. And so an update from Boris Jordan. Thank you, Boris, for this great news as German draft cannabis legislation to be approved this summer with a January 1 start. A medical market 4 times the size of Florida, $3 billion, a $12 billion opportunity. Best news, removes cannabis from the narcotics list, which is huge. Would be similar to descheduling in the US. Obviously, that is our dream. We can hope for that somehow happening, but rescheduling to 3 is most likely. And allowance of consumption and social clubs. And so scrolling down just so that you can read some of the comments if you'd like. But with that, back to the U.S. for some state news. As MJ Biz Daily shares, the ACLU joins the court fight over Florida recreational cannabis legalization. And so while Florida voters want this to be on the 2024 ballot, there is a big battle between the Florida Attorney General and pro-cannabis groups in Florida. And so main thing to highlight, of course, you can pause to read more to go through that if you'd like, but arguments are due August 2nd. And so next week, I will have an update for you whether or not this will be on the ballot, and it's going to be some big news. But with that, out of Florida, the Office of Medical Cannabis Use for this past week, if we look at dispensary locations that were approved from July 24th to the 28th, we see 3. Air Wellness opened a new dispensary in Orlando, Green Thumb Industries opened a new one in Fruitland Park, and True Leaf in Kissimmee. And so good to see these MSOs continuing to block out the noise and just focusing, putting their head down and expanding where they need to early on. And so their qualified patient count did increase this week to 835,879, which represents a week-over-week increase of 1,771 patients, which is certainly a jump from last week where we saw just a little over 600. So nice to see that jump back up. But with that last bit, the dispensations for July 21st to the 27th, every MSO operating in the state, the number of active dispensaries that they have, and for this past week, the number of milligrams of THC sold, the number of milligrams of CBD sold, and the number in ounces of smokable flower sold. And so I do not have the data yet, but whenever connoisseurs.io or Pierre Gilles does share their market share comp sheet, I will share that in the comments so that you can take a look. Just another way of taking this information in a visual format. But with that, from Yahoo News, as I think it's republished from Columbia Daily Tribune, so probably a local Missouri paper, but 50,000 Missouri cannabis cases expunged since the start of recreational sales. Attorney says, love to see states like Missouri and Maryland absolutely crushing it and setting the gold standard for how to legalize cannabis and end prohibition in the U.S. And so, of course, you can pause to read more, but good to see them, making progress since launching in February. That was when Missouri effectively launched. And so 5 months later, they've gotten 50,000 cases and 50,000 people gotten their lives back. So love to see that. More on this if you wanted to grab the full link in the description, but I'll scroll down if you wanted to pause to read, though apparently the story continues. And so again, that's out of Missouri. With that, from Marijuana Moment, as bipartisan Senate and House lawmakers seek expert input on CBD regulations as the FDA faces pressure to do what they should have done decades ago. And I'd say the positive takeaway is apparently the FDA is assessing the potential for a regulatory pathway for hemp-derived CBD products, and that would be huge because CBD clearly is healthier than so many substances that are legal, especially alcohol and tobacco just outright. But it's like, oh, what? The lack of input is what stopped you from doing your jobs, and now you're seeking the help that you need to fucking do it? Yeah, right. All this leads me to believe is that we might be at a tipping point where we actually see CBD, regulated legally and put on shelves everywhere, which would be a huge step in normalizing the plant. That would be a great step from now until getting the rescheduling review for cannabis as a whole as well. But all I can say is let's hope that the pressure is actually mounting to something this time around. But with that, an interesting one out of Japan, as I didn't know much about their CBD industry or that they even had one, but the Japanese CBD industry growth forecast now till 2025. And so this is an old article, but just wanted to share it because I didn't know about it at all, and it caught my interest. The Yano Research Institute report, so you can pause to read if you're interested, made in Japan CBD. And while I did remember seeing that they were going to make this change and allow CBD a while back, of course, it's not THC, and so it's not medical cannabis, but can be used in skin cream, topicals, can be used in essentially everything, right? And so it is interesting to see how this might evolve in Japan, a more welcoming island than the US, hard to believe, right? At least in terms of CBD than THC. An aging empire, a massive demand for CBD, no doubt, because it's a very important compound that we still know very little about, and Japan's on its way to know more about it than the US, that's for sure. But last bit, and keep in mind, I don't know what GVB Biopharma is, and so this could be an advertorial for this company. And so again, I'm not paid by this company, I'm not promoting anything, I'm just sharing this because you probably didn't know that there was a CBD market in Japan, and apparently it's expected to grow from 196 million in 2022 to 629 million by 2025. And so that's fascinating. A bit more down here if you wanted to pause to read. I'll bring you down to the discussion. And then this bit here. Otherwise, grab the link in the description if you're interested. But again, take it with a grain of salt. It does look like an advertorial to want to sell CBD at the same time. And so with that, from Forbes, Uruguay marks 6 years of cannabis sales with 10.7 million grams sold. And so congratulations, Uruguay, for being being the first country to make some common sense policy around this, but just 10.7 million grams sold. Obviously, you could sell a lot more if you expanded the opportunity. Pause to read more, but it does highlight how no government works quickly, as the country was first to legalize in 2013 and only began sales 4 years later in 2017. And so happy of the progress it's made, though, no doubt, I'm sure. But if we scroll down, we can see that currently just 61,509 registered individuals are eligible to access pharmacies for cannabis purchases. And moreover, there are 3 companies producing cannabis, and the sale is authorized in just 37 pharmacies distributed across 10 departments throughout the country. And so talk about a bottleneck and, a suffocated industry of what could be something bigger if you allowed the legal number of outlets and you allowed anyone to access this amazing medicine. But all that to say, that is Uruguay. Grab the link in the description if you wanted to read more. And last but just to show you, the Dales report did have a Spaces with Don Murphy this week on the 27th of July. I did tune into a bit of it in the evening. It was played late at 8 p.m. But this is going to be one you don't want to miss. Figured I would just share it if you wanted to tune in. They did talk a lot about, the new updates of this week. Main thing is just what we thought could happen before the August recess. What we were told would, of course, Can got kicked down the road, and it's likely going to be taken up in September, as we saw in the beginning there. And so, of course, full link in the description if you want to go through that. But that is it for today's episode, folks. I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and I really hope you got some value out of it. What did you think of the stories mentioned? Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions, and I'd be happy to address them. But besides that, if you enjoyed this video and you learned something, please just leave a like on it. Subscribe below if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I will catch you next week on Sunday for another episode of This Week in Cannabis News. Have a great week, everybody. Take